Hi, and welcome to the Grace Cycle Show. I'm your host, Karen Dittman, and my heart for this show is to help you stop striving and struggling in life and instead step into the freedom of growing closer to God through His grace. You don't need to try harder. You need to try different. Because sometimes life feels like a crazy hamster wheel. You want to get off, but it just won't stop. And if you do feel that way, I'd like to invite you to take my quiz, How Fast is Your Hamster Wheel Spinning? It will only take you 50 seconds. You can find it at hamster.onefit-wellness.com or just click on the link in the show notes. This quiz will help you see what's spinning your hamster wheel, how it's impacting you, and maybe what you can do to help slow it down. In today's episode, I'm bringing you the first interview for Season 2 of The Grace Cycle Show with Kim Cusimano. Kim Cusimano is a collaborative author who finds joy and an expanded ministry reach through writing. As a mother to 2 special needs adults, she is passionate about ministering to caregivers and inspiring people of all abilities. These passions influence her writing, providing readers with generous amounts of encouragement. When she isn't writing, she enjoys bringing small groups together into her living room, whether for a weekly book club or a quarterly friend gathering. She values relationships and helping people make authentic connections with one another. Through hospitality, mentoring, and the arts, Kim encourages women with the faith lessons she learns as a wife, mother, and caregiver. You'll hear some of those lessons today. Kim's writing can be found in some recent publications and collaborative works, such as Life in the Estrogen-Free Zone, This Reimagined Empty Nest, and Moments of Grace for Moms, and Moments of Grace for Teachers. So I really hope you'll be encouraged, just as I was, by today's interview with Kim Cusimano. Well, Kim, welcome so much to the Grace Cycle Show. I'm glad you're here, and I'm excited to hear more of your story of how God has worked in your life and in your family. So why don't you just jump in and share with us how you have seen God overcome the impossible in your family by His grace?
I look forward to it. And thanks for having me, Karen. It was a joy to meet you recently at a conference we both attended. We just had a few minutes to share, so this will even give me an opportunity to tell you more about my story than I did in those few brief moments. My husband, Joe, we're parents to 4 young adults now. Sometimes we wonder how we survived getting them grown, don't we?
Yes.
Um, but our 2 oldest children were special needs children. Our oldest son was a special needs infant, and we knew that right away when he was born that he would have some developmental issues and some challenges. He's 28 now, and he does really well. He does have some things like he's not a driver. So as he works a part-time job, I still get to be taxi driver, and I don't think I'm going to ever get to retire that, Karen. I think I'll always be taxi driver mom, even when I'm 80. Hopefully they don't pull my keys too soon.
Really?
Um, and then our oldest daughter, we have 2 sons and 2 daughters. So our oldest daughter was born as a healthy baby. We didn't know any different until she was about 4. And then she started showing signs of, well, honestly, Karen, we didn't know what she was showing signs of, but she began to talk to herself, have facial expressions that didn't always match, what was going on around her. And as we started to check things out, really over a series of about 3 or 4 years, we would consult a different specialist, so forth, so on. It became evident by the time she was 7 years old that she had inherited a mental illness. And all of our children are adopted. We built our family through adoption 20 some years ago, and we started on that path almost 30 years ago now, which is crazy. Evidently, through her family, she had inherited mental illness. And we did know of a slight possibility of that. There were some notations, what little tiny bit we had in her adoption information. But we weren't sure initially if it was autism, or we couldn't imagine a child exhibiting mental illness traits so young. But we took some video clips of her to talk to doctors first. And we were thanked for those video clips more than once, because they said if we had not provided the video, it would have been hard for them to really understand what we were describing. And I know at one time when she was about 8, she had already received a diagnosis of onset childhood schizophrenia at 7. But around 8, her pediatric psychiatrist asked if she could submit those videos to a board review, like through a university hospital. We said sure. And our pediatric psychiatrist was just trying to cover all of her bases. And that board review that were made up of other psychiatrists all confirmed that diagnosis. And so as our daughter started medication very young for that sort of thing, and it was very scary at the time, she responded well to the medication. It was one pill. And in a lot of ways, we got our little girl kind of back, so to speak. It quieted her, talking to herself, and the facial expressions would come from like auditory hallucinations that only she could hear. And she was responding to those things with her facial expressions. And a lot of that's diminished, and it was really nice. And we had about 8 years where you might have thought our little daughter was shy. She didn't communicate with a lot of words. You would have just thought of her as quiet. She needed a little bit of remedial help in school, but a lot of people would have known no different. And then when she hit adolescence, there was a deterioration, which sadly can be common with children who do have mental illness issues. Adolescence is very, very hard on them. And so we started down a road of regression and things that we had not dealt with until for the first time, like a little bit of aggression, irritation, things like that. And so the journey got a little harder a number of years ago. And now she graduated through special ed a few years ago, and Daddy and I are a lot like caretakers in many ways. She's intellectually challenged as well. So we take care of her a lot like a child of about elementary age. And my husband and I talked a few years ago. There was a point where we didn't share her story much. Seemed like it was something that should be private. But as the years have gone by, we've realized how many parents and families really need the encouragement. And we want Anna's story. We want to allow God to use it in an honorable way, honor her and honor him, and give God the glory that we're able day in to day out to walk this journey.
Thank you, Kim. Yes, our oldest 2 kids are adopted. And I know that when we adopted our kids, and they're now 24 and 26, so back 25, 30 years ago, we were all thinking we adopt them, we bring them into a loving home,
That's right.
and it will solve everything. And it didn't.
It doesn't. It doesn't. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit just about your expectations and where, what you expected and where you found kind of that disconnect between what you expected as an adoptive mom and where God met you with his grace?
Yeah, although Karen, I think you got ahead of me. You just articulated it really well. I don't think we foresee a lot
Mm.
of these things. I think we think, just like any parents, even who have had biological children, we go through the same excitement, the same anticipation of enjoying, our children. Our children were just out of infancy, like 7 months plus. All 4 of our children were adopted and brought home from 7 months old to a year old. So, it was all the fun things, fun little clothes, a lot of baby showers and gifts and all of those things. And I think at first, probably by God's grace, we live in some degree of naivety just to enjoy, and even God's word says, don't worry about tomorrow. And that may be no truer than for first-time parents. We can't take on all the worries, whether we've birthed those children or not, of what will come, down the road. But sometimes it feels like we get maybe a little shell shocked quickly when something comes up that we're not understanding what's going on. And one of the things, I didn't understand it so much many years ago, and our children are similar ages as yours. Our children range from 21 to 28. But looking back, I realize there's no truer verse probably in the Bible for me than God's grace is sufficient. And it has been sufficient. I thought in the early years we were trudging through alone. Now, we are Christ followers and we prayed but I can see that wrestling with God. You know, when we get in times where we don't know what to do, we just feel like we're wrestling around. We don't always see God's hand as clearly in the moment. But when I do look back, I see how he provided like specialists that might be hard to get into, but we somehow got an appointment, or a right teacher that was a great fit, you know, for our daughter, access to maybe a medication choice that hadn't been thought of, but now another doctor, you know, had the insight. And now looking back, I see all those things as the grace and hand of God. One of the stories, Karen, I thought of a lot of stories, even of the years of raising our daughter, but there was something recent that made such an impact on me. And it reflects on this verse that God's grace is sufficient. And the Bible, the verse actually says for you, God's grace is sufficient for you. And I had a friend, an old college buddy. We're not old, we're just old buddies, as we like to say, but lives a little ways away from me, but we try to get together a couple of times a year. And her son, her and her husband have a young adult son that also has some issues. And every once in a while, my friend will come over because she just needs some encouragement. And this happened a while back. She's like, Kim, can I come over and talk? And I said, sure. So we visit about our children, the experiences, the challenges. And after she leaves that evening, I said to my husband, I said, I don't know how they do it. They have some real concerns, even for their son's life, as he kind of walks a dark road. And I mean, I just, you know, said that to my husband in private. I don't know how they do that and carry that worry and burden every day. So a few days later, my friend and I touched base on the phone. And she said, Kim, I told my husband that night after leaving your home, I don't know how Joe and Kim do that. And I said, well, that's kind of funny because I told Joe, I didn't know how you guys did it. Now, isn't that interesting? In many ways, we both thought each other's story was harder.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that my friends carry a harder load right now. But we all know Christ and we rely on him to be our help and our sustainer. And even though we can't pinpoint all the time what is the exact help, I know just from stories like that he is indeed helping. He is being faithful just as he's promised. His grace is sufficient for them to help their son, and his grace is sufficient for me and Joe to care for our daughter. But neither one of us would want to change roles. And that situation with my friend occurred, a couple months ago now. But it's still kind of rolling around in my brain, Karen, because I just think, God, I forget. I easily forget that you are everything you promised in your word. You are faithful. You are my help. I've been reading in the Psalms the last number of days, and how many times even David said, you are my help. You are my help. You are my help.
Mm.
Um, so God is faithful to keep his promises, and his grace is sufficient. And that verse is in 2 Corinthians 12:9, where he said to Paul, you know, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. And then I looked that up some because I just wanted to know a little bit more. And it really gets to be real simple. Sufficiency means enough. My grace is enough. And even the word you, any of your audience, Karen, any that I share with my audience, they can put their own name in there. God's
Yeah.
grace is sufficient for Karen, for Kim, for, you know, whoever. And so it's just that impacted me. That situation even recently impacted me so much. And I thought, God, I want to carry it forward. Don't let me forget. One thing about having children that can be neurodivergent, or our daughter does have a mental illness diagnosis, but it comes with autistic traits.
Mm-hmm.
And that is often the case in the world of complicated neurodiagnosis, is that it'll be a mix of a lot of things. And when you walk journeys with loved ones, whether children or possibly a spouse or something, there will be ups and downs, and it will not always stay down. And, we all know it won't always stay up.
Right.
But if I can remember God's faithfulness from every day prior, which has been years and years and years now of our daughter's life, I will be able to walk the downs with more confidence for every day to come.
Yeah, I love that. I've been reading and meditating through Second Corinthians for a long time now, and I've been in that chapters 10, 11, 12 for a while. And I love that passage from Second Corinthians 12. And as you were talking, I was making a connection that God didn't just say, "My grace is sufficient for you," to Paul out of the blue. He said it to Paul when Paul was saying, "Please, this thing that I've got that I'm wrestling with is so hard, and it's limiting my ministry, and it's limiting how I think I can serve you. Would you please take this away? Would you please heal this?" And Paul asked God that 3 times, and God said, "My grace is sufficient for you. My
Mhm.
grace is enough. It's what you need." And so I think that that's I don't know, maybe a helpful or healing place for our hearts to go. He doesn't say my grace is sufficient because life is easy. He says my grace is
Right.
sufficient because you need it.
That's right. And that context is really important. I love that he never reprimanded Paul for asking over and over.
Right.
But the answer would always be the same, wouldn't it? And
Mm-hmm.
even for us, and when we think of raising children or children that may have many challenges, we've probably asked over. It's funny, Paul's only documented there saying he asked, 3 times. I've probably asked, 3,000 times, Karen.
Right.
And God's
Right.
answer is the same, but it's also a faithful answer.
Mm-hmm.
If he couldn't be trusted, there wouldn't be any power in those words. But I've learned through years that I can trust him. And I know we'll go through valleys again. One little note that I made was another thing that our family had gone through recently with our daughter. She had been very stable for about 3 years. About three and a half years ago, we had another hard time. We had a valley time where some of her meds weren't working anymore. We tried to make changes, things got worse. It was the first time she was ever hospitalized for a while. And so we went through that about 3.5 years ago, but the last number of years have been, they stabilized with some new meds on board. And then at the beginning of the summer, we were going to take a family trip to the beach, and we were going to drive from Oklahoma, Florida Panhandle. So it's a little bit of a drive. And we got about 40 minutes away from our home, and she had a grand mal seizure in the car. And she had had those even the 3+ years ago, sometimes new meds, and antipsychotic meds are known for that as a risk, having seizures. So we had seen them before, but she hadn't had one in 3+ years. And we were able to get off the road, and by God's goodness we're just out on highway driving, and we were able to get off to like a love station or something fairly quickly. And we had to make the decision about what to do, come home or go on. And the only reason we debate about going on is we had seen her have these before, but it's very unnerving, very unsettling. And we made the decision to come home though. So we canceled a beach vacation. God was good in some other ways. Our youngest daughter is a college student. She was with us for the vacation, but she happened to have another beach vacation planned with some college buddies for an extended weekend a few weeks down the road. And our son had just gotten to do something special the week prior. He had been on a little special thing. So, anyway, we came home, and it was a really good decision. But as we drove home, the disappointment and the weight of, well, we didn't even know why she had the seizure. And even in my mind, I thought, God, in 3 years now, I've gotten a little like I had breathed again. And I had to decide what to do with that weight that just came out of nowhere, a fear of why she might have had that. And those grand mal seizures, even the visual, they kind of stay with you. I mean, it looks very, very scary. Lasted 2.5 to 3 minutes was our best estimate. And when we got home, what do? We all just stare at her. We wouldn't leave her
Yeah.
alone in a room. I stayed up half the night for a few nights, listening, to her sleep until the point of exhaustion. Spoke with a couple of her doctors, and we did theorize why we think she might have had it, but it totally was an unexpected disruption again. In fact, if anything, Karen, I kind of flashed back to that 3+ years ago was a difficult season for like a 2-year window that we really struggled. And I thought it caused me to get disoriented. I thought, are we going back to one of the hardest times we'd ever lived through? But I did catch myself. And there was a point I thought, God, your grace was sufficient then. We made it through that really, really, really difficult time. Whatever this is, whatever this happened, you're the same anchor now that you were then. Thankfully, there was no other seizure. And again, we think we know why it may have happened. But I realize those times will keep coming. And that's one reason I mentioned that earlier as you and I started visiting. The valleys will still come. I know that.
Hmm.
But having learned to catch myself on what I'm holding on to is making all the difference, even in the days to come.
What tips could you offer for somebody who is in a life circumstance where they know things are going to go through the ups and downs, the hills and the valleys? What tips can you offer for that kind of how to catch yourself, how to remember that
Yeah.
this is just a valley?
A few practical things. Well, I think you just said how to remember. And then God, and in the Old Testament, they were told, remember, remember, remember over and over. And so even that is one of my tips is as I've walked with God, even years before becoming a mother, but then a mother and then a special needs mother. Now I feel like I'm a slow learner, Karen. I'm like, it's only taken me, well, I'm in my 50s, but we'll say 30+ years of adulthood and beyond of getting the principle of remembering, like how powerful the principle of remembering is. So just like when that came up recently, I thought, okay, God, we lived through one of the hardest times where I didn't think we were going to make it, but we did. And you supplied the right doctor and so forth and so on. And so I just started remembering. And so I would say that's really one of my favorite tips. The other thing is if you happen to be a special needs mom or someone that's a caregiver for possibly a parent or spouse or dementia or autism or some of those things that the weight of it is daily right there in your home. I have started taking little vacations in my home, like my patio. It's a little, and when I say little, okay, let's call them little mini vacations almost every day. Like my patio has become a special place in our home. I can be sitting on my patio and there's windows through to our living room. So if my daughter's watching a Disney movie or something, I can sit on the patio and still kind of see what she's doing. And I've learned that there are little things that have made a big difference in life. And on my patio, sometimes I'm talking to God, prayer. Sometimes I do my Bible reading out there. Other times I'm talking to a friend on the phone. Sometimes I'm just sitting with a book or another quiet activity or something. But I've learned to take time out, even if caregiving, but the time out may be like 10 minutes. But when I do, I think, Lord, thank you that I have a few minutes or I have a space or I have a place I can sit by myself. So I've changed a lot of how I think about, the friend that said, I don't know how you and your husband do it. One of the phrases she said is, Kim, you don't have freedom.
Hmm.
And I said, well, I've learned within boundaries of even taking care of our daughter, I have freedom within those boundaries. The boundaries are God given. And I've also come to realize that taking care of our daughter is a God given responsibility. I didn't used to understand that, Karen, and I don't know where that kind of came to me, but a few years ago, I started using that phrase. I remember even saying to my husband, it kind of changes everything if I think of it as God given responsibilities.
Hmm.
No one gave it to me for my worst. God gave it to me for my best and my daughter's best. And so within those boundaries of caregiving for our daughter, I have freedom within that. I can have new routines. I have total freedom with my attitude.
Mm.
I garden more. I joke about, oh my, I've become the old lady with beautiful flowers. I'm totally proud of it.
That's
I'm the old
great.
lady taking pictures of my rose bushes out in the backyard, but it brings me great joy. And I've learned to do other things that God has given me freedom to do. I do not have the same freedom as my friend. And what she was saying was they have a lot of worry about their son, a lot.
Mhm.
And he has a lot of struggles and he lives in their home without a job and with things they don't know where it's going, Karen. They don't know what the end will be. But he
Mhm.
drives. He can care for himself. And I'm thinking, I can't imagine the weight. I can't imagine the weight of worrying about him every day as an individual that might make such poor decisions that things just keep unraveling. So anyway, for God to know my friend walks with Jesus and to know I walk with Jesus, watching how we're each living within our own God-given responsibilities, but we have freedom within that. And so that is a tip, is just to say to people, what has God given you control over? I invite more ladies over to my home now. Did not used to do that years ago, Karen. A few years ago, as my daughter got out of high school, I just thought, well, now I can't go to women's Bible study. Now I can't go here or there because there wasn't a place for her. And a few years ago, I thought, I'm totally free to invite anyone over to my home. So now, about once a month, I invite someone over for lunch. And, it's usually a close friend, like someone that knows our daughter and all the things. And I
Mhm.
get to have fellowship and stuff in my home. So we do have a lot of choices within our God-given responsibilities. And if we can remember that, I think it's a great tip to make adjustments for ourselves.
I love that. The perspective of instead of focusing on what I can't do,
Mhm.
focus on what can I do within these limits that I have. Because the reality is we are all limited in some way.
That is exactly right, Karen. That's it. And I read that somewhere one day, and I wish I could give credit to somebody, but that stuck with me too. She was making that point. We
Mhm.
forget to take notice of that, but whether it's someone's budget, their own health, their time, all kinds of things, we do have natural limits, but we forget. We think
Mhm.
ours might just be worse or someone else's maybe less or worse. But that is so true. Very true.
Yeah. And I'm just aware that we're meant to have limits now. We're meant to have limits on this earth because that drives us to depend on God.
Mhm.
And when we are in his presence eternally, we are free to do everything and anything forever, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. I also really like your idea of just taking these, even if it's 10 minutes, the mini vacation
Mhm.
in within your home, within the space that you have, because a vacation doesn't have to be a big trip that I've planned to go away somewhere else. Sometimes a vacation is just that mini time to rest and
Yeah.
connect with God.
Yeah. I'll tell you this real quick as we wind up, but I've
Mhm.
been so impressed. He's really taught me something. Our son that doesn't drive, his name is Nate, and we took Nate and Anna on a short cruise last year. It was our first time to try it. We wondered if we could travel with Anna that way. We don't fly with her anymore over the years. And so Nate has caught the cruise bug. But what he does, Karen, he's only been on one, but what he does, he loves cruise YouTube videos. And so
Oh.
even one day, recently, he walked in the living room and he said something about, I think he said to my husband, Dad, I was listening to my favorite cruise influencer, and he goes on to tell us about something. And in a lot of ways, he is traveling
Hmm.
through something that he has control to do. Nate
Yeah.
cannot drive. He relies on Dad and I for any travel he'll ever get to do. But he is enjoying travel, and it's brought him great joy to watch travel YouTube videos. And you would think that maybe sometimes it would make him lament, oh, I can't, go or do. He's thoroughly enjoying them. And I have taken notice how much joy that's brought him. So no matter our limitations, there's always a way to enjoy maybe a passion or something that God's given us. We just have to tweak it. And God
Mhm.
will give us the wisdom, even if we ask, God, how can I tweak this? I would really like to do it. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, Nate's kind of cruising every day in his free time. He's cruising with his favorite influencers. I think it's great, though. I think it's
Yeah.
great. And it reminds me that I can do the same.
What a great shift of perspective that it's not that he's sitting there wishing that he could do this, but he is living it. He's experiencing it anyway. I love that. Well, Kim, if there is anything that you would want our listeners to just take away from this conversation, what would you have them remember?
I think to go back to, I've based a lot of what I've shared on 2 Corinthians 12:9. And I would like our listeners to go and put their own name in there. And I referenced that earlier, but I think it can be so powerful that God's grace is sufficient for Kim and for Karen. And I'd like for them to put their own name there and to read it and maybe post it somewhere where they read it
Mm,
frequently. But I think it's helped me with a great shift in perspective.
mm. Yeah, a post-it on the bathroom mirror is a pretty
That's
powerful
right.
tool. Yes,
That's right.
that's great. Well, Kim, tell us a little bit about your ministry and how people can reach out to you if they want to learn more.
Well, I do have a website. It's called fulljoyministries.com. And on there are a few sample blogs. I have a few podcast links where I've been a guest other times. I do a little bit of speaking, usually to small groups. I don't travel real frequently because of my responsibilities at home, but I can, and I like to do a lot of local type things. I mainly have found a little avenue in doing collaborative writing where I'll submit stories or poems or articles to books that, maybe a group of authors. And so some of my books are on the website there. I need to update a few of my more recent ones are not. So yeah, I enjoy writing and I enjoy encouraging special needs parents. And especially if those people are part of your audience, I'd love to hear from them. And my daily email is kim@cusimano.us. And they can find the spelling of my name. It's a great old Italian name that I inherited from my hubby. And I'm on Facebook, kim.cusimano.79. And so find me on Facebook, visit fulljoyministries.com, zap me an email. I would love to hear from them.
Wonderful. And I will make sure to put all of those links in our show notes too, so it'll be easy for people to reach out to you.
That would be great.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Kim, and for your insights. And I know I really found it helpful to just reframe my perspective. It's not about what I don't have, what I can't do, but within the limits that God has placed on my life, what can I do? So thank you.
I
And
loved it,
his,
Karen. Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. So, and his grace is sufficient for us.
It
Great.
is.
As I think back on this interview, I found so much encouragement from Kim and the lessons that she shared with me. In my own life right now, my God-given responsibilities and circumstances have me feeling like I'm really limited in what I can do. But I can lean into accepting things as they are and look for what freedoms I do have within my boundaries. We talk about reconciling with things we can't change or control as part of the grace cycle. And this is a perfect example of that, of living in that space of reconciling with the things I can't change. And within my circumstances, I find His grace is sufficient. It's all I need, and it's exactly what I need. When I remember that God's grace is His power at work in the world to accomplish His purposes, then I can truly lean into trusting Him. My circumstances, my God-given responsibilities are for my good and for His glory. So remember Kim's reminder, His grace is sufficient for you. God's grace is sufficient for you. I pray and I hope that you are learning along with me to lean on and to trust in God's grace. And so as we wrap up today's episode, I want to invite you once again, if you feel like you're still struggling to find God's grace in the midst of the hamster wheel of your life, maybe what you need to do for one next step is to take the 50 seconds to identify what's going on that's spinning your hamster wheel and what you can do about it through my quiz, How Fast is Your Hamster Wheel Spinning? And again, you can find that quiz at hamster.onefit-wellness.com or click on the link in the show notes. The quiz and its results will help you figure out your next steps to thrive by living in grace. So that's it for today. Would you please take a second to subscribe to the show so you know when future episodes are coming out? And it would mean the world to me if you would rate or review the show, and that way it will help other people to find the show as well. So until next time, remember to get curious, stay connected, and live in grace.